it makes you a little hysterical when you send an email like that. Like, we're just shredding everything. Shove as much crap in there as you can. We got one day to fry all this stuff.
Congressman, why do you think Democrats are trying to shut down the government?
Because I think they're trying to inflict as much pain in a political type situation, and that's very pitiful. And also, they want to shut down Doge because it's getting very close to home.
It would be great if the Democrats would do what's right for our country for a change, because they've lost their way.
This email freaked a lot of people out, yours truly included. I saw it and I said, oh, great, here it goes. They're shredding everything just as we suspected. We saw this email. It came from Sarah Cook and others. They say, look, USAID staff have been instructed to clear out their files. Here's what the email looked like, right? And it looks pretty serious. It says, hey, good afternoon. Thank you for your assistance in clearing out our classified safes and personnel documents from the RRB. The event will take place all day on March 11th, beginning at 9:30 a.m. You go, what? All day shred event? Shredathon? Please meet at the RRB 14th Street lobby at 9:30. If you can't be there at the exact time, then your badge will be programmed. Now, shred as many documents first and reserve the burn bags for when the shredder becomes unavailable or needs a break. Sheesh. If you need to use the burn bags, do not overfill them and ensure the burn bag can be closed with staples at the top. The only labeling required on the burn bags are the words secret and USAID in dark Sharpie if possible. If you need additional burn bags or Sharpie markers, please let me or the SEC team know. Everybody saw that, went, what the heck is going on over there? Is that Hunter Biden who sent that email? No, it was acting executive secretary. Say, wait, acting secretary. So that's one of Trump's people. Turns out it's all okay. It's all normal, right? Here is what the Trump White House said in response. Anna Kelly, deputy press secretary, and this also was filed in court, says the USAID building is going to be occupied by CBP. This was sent to roughly 36 employees. The documents involved were mostly courtesy content, old content from other agencies, and the originals still exist on classified computer systems. So this is just fake news hysteria. It's not a big deal. And look, it makes you a little hysterical when you send an email like that. Like, we're just shredding everything. Shove as much crap in there as you can. We got one day to fry all this stuff. And so people rightfully were concerned about it, I think. And what happened was there was a lawsuit that got filed immediately. American Foreign Service Association, Personal Services Contractor Association, they sued, saying, don't delete your files. You guys can't shred everything. And this is strange because these are, third parties, right? Non-governmental organizations who were filing these lawsuits saying, no, keep those documents. But they explained, the Trump people explained, they filed this from the Trump administration as defendants in these lawsuits. They say, look, Your Honor, let us shred our stuff, okay? The motion for a TRO assumes, based on one out of context email, okay, that USAID was conducting an indiscriminate purge of documents at the Ronald Reagan building. But they have depicted that as a violation of federal law, violating rules of spoliation of evidence and pertinent instant actions and other things. But they have seriously misapprehended the facts here, okay? Trained USAID staff sorted and removed classified documents in order to clear the space that was occupied by the fired USAID people. The removed classified documents had nothing to do with this litigation. They were copies of documents from other agencies or derivatively classified documents where the original document is retained by another government agency or where there is no need for USAID to retain a copy, right? And so that might be stuff that is permanently deleted on there. Now, any documents pertaining to current classified programs were retained, as were all personnel records and any document that must be retained under the Federal Records Act, right? Like, there's rules against deleting stuff. So moreover, USAID will not destroy any additional documents after March 11th without first notifying these other people or giving them an opportunity to raise an objection. Now, because the USAID was not violating and will not violate the rules against deleting documents and is not destroying evidence that is applicable here, they're not going to win any TRO. They've not established that they're going to suffer any harm, especially given that USAID is no longer removing documents and will not resume the removal of documents without this court's opinion. But here's what's happening, they say. Look, pretty simple. As part of a recent restructuring of USAID, there's a bunch of extra space in the Ronald Reagan building. And guess who's coming in? Border Patrol. As part of this decommissioning process, the General Services Administration and Border Patrol asked USAID to clear the space of the documents by March 11th so they can move in. Stored in parts of that space were a bunch of classified documents in classified safes or SCIFs. And so what happened was 34 selected personnel conducted a planned removal of the documents. Those employees all hold secret level or higher security clearances. All of them completed records management training. The vast majority of the documents that are being removed are in two categories. They're just copies of documents that came from other agencies, or they were derivatively classified documents that are created for some other purpose, like they're derivative of something else, but we don't need them because we have the other original document. Originals are maintained, but all these other notes and travel documents and other things things, if we do need them, they are maintained in original scans. So staff are working on decommissioning this. They were instructed to retain any original documents and dispose of them in accordance with the National Archives. They were also instructed to retain current classified programs and putting other things into permanent storage. And by the way, the Office of Human Capital was also brought in on this. Nothing was destroyed that related to them. Everything we've done has been in accordance with applicable law, including federal records. Most of the classified documents that were deemed subject to destruction were placed in approved burn bags. Those burn bags are currently being stored in Ronald Reagan. We're going to hold on to those until you rule. And we've already stated we're not going to destroy anything. So at some point on March 11th, we saw this, an internal email containing partial logistical instructions on carrying out the removal was made public, but everything else is legitimate, right? That was one out of context note. So here, based on social media, they say that we're destroying stuff, but that's not true. We're not destroying anything. In any event, even apart from the apparent legal deficiencies, since we're not destroying anything, the declaration says we're allowed to destroy these things. They're copies. They're not even important. So chill. Plaintiffs provide no contrary basis for second guessing any of our employees' decisions on the fact that we don't need these documents. And there's no duty to preserve evidence because this evidence that we're destroying is not related to this claim. So we're not destroying or spoiling evidence. It's not even subject to what you want. So plaintiffs nevertheless maintain that we have to keep duplicate documents, but there's no precedent saying that we do, nor is there any reason to believe that there are other documents that are related to other litigation. And so they're not going to win. There's no harm. We're not going to destroy any of these documents until we get official order to do this. So it's not a basis for what they're seeking as a remedy right now. And you also need to weigh the harm against the benefits. And they've not met the requirements for a TRO. And so that's the story on the documents. Signed here by the U.S. Department of Justice, right? Everything's above board. I agree. It's a freaky email. You go, oh, here we go. They're shredding everything, but apparently it was all planned, just making room for the Border Patrol. So in addition to that, the Trump White House dropping major executive memos explaining that this reform now must go into place. And this reform is a powerful one. This might stop or limit, at least, depending on the judges, the claims that are brought by Democrat law firms and Democrat NGOs. It's Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 65C. What this applies to is injunction bonds. And here is what Trump said. Look, in recent weeks, activist organizations fueled by hundreds of millions of dollars in donations and even government money have obtained sweeping injunctions far beyond the scope of relief contemplated by the rules, essentially, functionally, usurping the power of the executive branch. Now, this is anti-democratic and it's a takeover of our power. There's no repercussions for them. And so the effective administration of justice needs to have a mechanism that deters frivolous litigation, that protects parties like the American people from unwarranted costs brought by Democrat lawyers and streamlines the judicial process. Now, one of those mechanisms that we've already talked about here weeks ago, Federal Rules of Civil Procedure 65C. It mandates that a party who is seeking a preliminary injunction or a TRO provide security in the amount that the court considers proper to cover the costs if the injunction is wrongly issued. So if USAID NGOs want the government to turn the money back on or to reinstate the contracts or to do any of those things, they got to post some amount of money so that if they lose, the government can take that money, because when the government does what they want the government to do, which is to reinstitute these contracts, the government's going to come out of pocket. And if it turns out the government was right, the government shouldn't have to come out of pocket without being able to recoup that. So now, consistent enforcement of this rule is critical. So therefore, President Trump says it is the policy of the United States to demand that parties seeking injunctions against the federal government must cover the costs and damages incurred if the government is ultimately found to have been wrongfully enjoined or restrained. Federal courts should hold them accountable. And so consistent with this, all executive departments and agencies in consultation with Pam Bondi are directed to ensure that their agencies properly request Rule 65 federal district courts require plaintiffs to post security equal to the federal government's potential costs and damages from the wrongly issued injunctions. Amazing, right? Because then you would say, okay, Judge Ali, and I don't know why this wasn't being pleaded from the beginning, but okay, Judge Ali, you want us to unpause these funds? That $2 billion that might go out, they have to post security in the form of $2 billion, you'd say, right? Because it's the equal amount. They don't have that, so therefore they can't bring a claim. So in request for security under Rule 65, Trump says agencies shall do the following, among other things. Says that Rule 65C is a mandate that the court requires in all applicable cases, if you're asking for an injunction, you post a security. So then the judges will say, well, it's not mandatory here. There's an exception to that rule, because there's always an exception to the rules. When some case says it doesn't apply for whatever reason, then they apply that reason to this case. Or that the security be like $1, nominal fees to cover potential costs or damages, but at least Trump is going to be mandating this is pleaded in every single case moving forward. The security amount the agency is requesting is based on a reasoned assessment of the potential harmed by their injunction, and failure of the party that moved for the preliminary injunction results in a dissolution of the requested injunctive relief. So if they don't post the bond, they can't pursue the claim. This memo doesn't create any other substantive rights and more, signed by Donald Trump, and a very nice development. We're happy to see that that will be coming out very soon. Now, Tim Burchett was out today talking about Doge and why he thinks they're getting so freaked out about all of this and why they're trying to get their money back. Here was Tim Burchett outside of DC.
Congressman, why do you think Democrats are trying to shut down the government?
Because I think they're trying to inflict as much pain in a political type situation, and that's very pitiful. And also, they want to shut down Doge because it's getting very close to home, and they know it. They're getting calls from their big contributors saying, hey man, we're getting this federal money, and y'all getting ready to cut it off. We're not going to be able to feed the trough, the campaign trough.
Of that piggy pork that all the politicians live off of, or did live off of until now. So good developments there. President Trump is saying these cuts are necessary. These reforms are going to make America much stronger. Here was the president meeting with Ireland today.
And financially we'll be stronger than ever before. I think the markets are going to soar when they see what's happening. I'll tell you what, I'm called every day by numerous big companies. I spoke at the Business Roundtable yesterday. They had the largest attendance they've ever had. And these are only the CEOs and chairmen, but mostly the people that run, the boss, the people that run the top 150 companies. 150 people showed up. Every single company showed up. First time it ever happened. It's been around a long time. The biggest business leaders. We had a great discussion. It went really well. And I want to tell you, there's tremendous optimism out there about our country in terms of regulations being cut, in terms of taxes being cut. And it would be great if the Democrats would do what's right for our country for a change, because they've lost their way.
Been that way for a while. Democrats not getting the message either. So President Trump explaining what's happening, and people are noticing that inflation is going down. Even CNN had to report it. So the cuts, the reforms will have an effect. All of the skittish people who are constantly crying about everything, no matter what it is. We're going to die because of COVID. We're going to die because of, it doesn't matter. Putin, never ending. They're having to admit that with time, a lot of this stuff will work out.
Finally, we have some good news on the economy, and really the number one issue for many Americans, the cost of living. So we just learned that consumer prices in February increased by 2.8% year over year, 0.2% month over month. Both of these figures were a step in the right direction, and both were better than expected. So this is definitely very encouraging to see, because it's going to, I think, relieve some fears that inflation was perhaps re-accelerating, because this actually breaks a streak of 4 straight months where I think you could see it on the chart all the way to the right, where the inflation rate was going in the wrong direction, right? It was going higher and higher. Finally, we're seeing it
dipping back down. You can see that little permutation right there going up and up and up and up, and then coming back down. And that's because the president is making changes, making reforms that are necessary, and we're here for it.